Being a professional anti-feminist is lucrative. It's also hypocritical and incoherent. Brett Cooper is the latest MAGA girl boss who is cashing in while betraying her right-wing values. But she did teach the Daily Wire that it's good when women work. I'm Amanda Marcotte. Welcome to Standing Room Only. Ben Shapiro thought he had a mini-me.
I guess you might also know her as the female Ben Shapiro. All the comments say we thought that was like a younger sister.
I think it's the eyebrows, but I really don't know. We should actually do a side-by-side, but I've seen it in some photos.
Are we related?
I mean, we haven't taken a DNA test.
Well, unless you're Ashkenazi. So I have taken a 23andMe.
Okay.
I'm 100.
You gave your DNA to those people?
Brett Cooper may share his anti-feminist views, but when it came to Ben, she didn't want a man to control her career. The 23-year-old right-wing commentator may no longer work for Ben Shapiro, but she could be his daughter. The resemblance between the two is very funny to me because Ben Shapiro is always whining about woke casting in Hollywood movies. He especially hates it when women get cast in the hero roles that were once reserved for men.
First of all, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel is one of the worst superhero characters ever. The person who they are thinking about casting is Aslan, who is supposed to be very obviously a metaphor for Jesus. The voice is now going to be Meryl Streep, which makes no sense at all. This is the same as that ridiculous suggestion a while back that Cynthia Erivo was going to be cast in Jesus Christ Superstar as Jesus. Stop with this stuff. Stop it. Just stop.
But we also know that Ben doesn't believe his own line. That's why he hired Brett. She's like him, except she's younger, cuter, and more female. It's like when Robert Downey Jr. stopped playing Iron Man and Dominique Thorne took his place. Bonus, you can pay women less. I'll be talking about that more and pass the mic with my guest, Kat Tenbarge. Brett was hired by the Daily Wire in 2022 to host a show called The Comment Section. A lot of her audience is creepy MAGA dudes, at least on YouTube. But her demographics elsewhere, especially on Spotify, tend to be female. Either way, her age made her seem fresh, especially compared to the middle-aged men she works with. Soon she was rivaling and even surpassing her older male counterparts, especially with videos titled "Leftists Are Sterilizing Themselves" and "Hot Girls Love Trump."
In your first 5 months of your show, you hit 1 million subscribers. So how did you do that, and how do I imitate this?
Well, you're doing it now because you're doing all of your TikToks.
That's fair.
You're doing your TikTok reactions, which you didn't want to do before.
I really did not, and still do not, actually.
Brett's popularity isn't due to her talent or her originality. Her takes are cookie-cutter MAGA outrage stuff. They're Xerox copies of Shapiro's diatribes. It's a myth that affirmative action rewards the less talented, but there's one place where that definitely happens: the GOP media ecosystem. Conservatives are desperate to hear their prejudices validated by a woman, especially if she's young and cute. You can be mediocre while pulling a huge audience.
If you are spending your time getting genuinely angry at billionaires and the way that they spend their money in their personal life, like, move on, touch grass. Have you ever wanted to play a video game where the protagonist is a black Japanese samurai who has gay love affairs with non-binary characters?
Yes.
I don't even play video games. The feminist movement, which is just the most perfect explanation for what that movement has become, because it's not really about empowerment. It's not really about equality. It became about dominating men, and that is all they care about.
Only in the bedroom. Sorry. And really, that was for the men. She's also hypocritical in the way all these anti-feminists are. She takes advantage of the rights and career opportunities that feminism afforded her, but then yells about how freedoms are supposedly ruining all other women. She even continues to work under her maiden name, even though she got married in 2023. But here's where the drama gets fun. She left the Daily Wire in 2024 and gave hilariously vague reasons.
I am ready to take on a new direction, both personally and professionally. The autonomy that I wanted to have, that was a huge thing, having autonomy. I felt like things had changed in my life and what I wanted had changed. I was ready for something different.
You just wanted a new challenge, or?
Yeah, I think,
Was it freedom?
Yeah.
You wanted more freedom?
Mm-hmm.
I can relate. I look just like my dad, and I also hate it when he tells me what to do. Anyway, her fans celebrated, assuming she was pulling off an F you pay me moment. Ironically, they hate it when feminists do that. The rumor was that she was fighting with Daily Wire CEO Jeremy Boring. I find that plausible. Boring did write and star in a movie where a pivotal scene involved explaining how women can't drive cars, play sports, work in STEM.
And running, and javelin, powerlifting, shot put, hockey, karate, football, pole vault, driving, parking, most of the STEM fields, rock and roll, opening pickle jars.
Okay. Yeah, boys are better at all of those things.
But that's okay because women can nurture and that's their real job.
Women are better at all kinds of things. They can be nurturing and sensitive and empathetic, better at doing lots of things at once and caring for a lot of people at once.
Thank you for telling our daughter she will amount to nothing. I didn't know you could be such a good dad. Boring appears to have been forced out a couple months after Cooper left the job.
He was like, we're making 200 million revenue. Like, we're going to cash out this company, basically. Like, I'm going to sell it to Fox News or someone like that. But instead, they say, Jeremy's stepping down, and he's just going to be doing a monthly podcast now.
And then Shapiro's quote is, "We can't wait to see what he does next." I'm not going to try to read too far between lines, but it doesn't take much.
Cooper did pay a price for leaving the Daily Wire. Yes, her independent YouTube channel has amassed over 1 million followers. But her audience at the Daily Wire was much bigger at 4.5 million. Her personal life also suffered. She was replaced by her producer, Reagan Conrad, as the host of the comment section. Reagan was her maid of honor, and now they're no longer friends.
My producer, Reagan, is taking over as host of the comment section, and I wish her and the Daily Wire all the best.
Do you feel that she was disloyal in taking the role?
No, she can do. She's an adult.
How did that feel?
Friendships are hard.
Are you guys still friends?
I don't say so.
Not that anyone should pity Cooper. She built a career pandering to sexism, even if she doesn't much like being on the receiving end of it. She was hired as a contributor at Fox News, though she did miss her first taping because of car troubles. She still has a massive audience, plus it's easy work. All you have to do is recite mindless talking points to an audience that will eat it all up as long as you're catering to their biases. Before Brett, the Daily Wire pushed out Candace Owens, who got famous because she's utterly shameless and into race baiting. But she wouldn't hide her anti-Semitism behind code words and dog whistles, so they pushed her out. It turns out the MAGA audience doesn't mind, though. They followed her to YouTube, where she has over 4 million subscribers. It's unlikely that Brett's ever going to get the audience that Candace Owens has. Candace has this looniness and sincere malevolence that Brett's just never going to be able to muster. But there's no doubt that the Daily Wire lost something when Brett left them. Not in talent. She's a hack just like the rest of them. But visually, their site is so boring to look at right now. It's the same white guy over and over in a pose like trying to look like he's thoughtful. You have to ask yourself, why would I care about these Matts and these Andrews and these Michaels when I already have Ben? They clearly understand this, which is why they've been trying to hire more women. Brett was something slightly different, at least in how she looks. The guys at the Daily Wire may not want to admit it, but diversity is a strength. If nothing else, it relieves the tedium. I'd like to welcome back Kat Tenbarge to Standing Room Only. Kat is an independent journalist who runs a newsletter called Spitfire News, and she recently had a great article in the New York Times about Blake Lively. Welcome to Standing Room Only, Kat.
Thanks so much for having me back.
So we're not talking about Blake Lively, thank God, this time. We're talking about Brett Cooper, and I wanted to ask you on because last time I spoke to you mentioned off camera Brett Cooper's stand-up career.
Yes.
And I just want to open with that. Please tell me about Brett's stand-up career.
So a few months ago, I went to Brett's first ever live show, which was here in New York. And I believe it was at one of those comedy clubs that has like a little bit of an anti-woke bent. Like they will bring on problematic people. But I was invited as press and I wanted to go see it because I was like, what is the experience of seeing a former Daily Wire correspondent live? And I went to the show and it was just packed. it was packed with people, and the audience was more diverse than I think a lot of people would expect. I think it skewed young, and there were a lot of women there, which makes sense. But one of the most interesting audience interactions she had was like she got up and she did a monologue for a little bit, and then she started interacting with the audience, and the first guy who spoke to her, who was like front row, front and center, huge Brett Cooper fan, was this young gay guy. And he was like, it's so hard to date as a gay guy in New York as a like Trump supporter. And I was sitting in the back like, well, that makes sense. But what she said to him was she was like, actually, New York is one of my biggest audience demographics on YouTube. Like, she was like, you'd think it would be more traditionally conservative areas, but New York is huge and that's why we're here. And so she was like, I'm sure there's another gay guy in my New York audience who you could connect with. And I do believe that's probably true, but it was just so fascinating thinking of her as like a youth culture or like a young adult cultural icon for these type of people.
Was she any good?
So substance-wise, not really. Charisma-wise, I did think she was very charismatic. And I can understand why people are sort of like gripped by her, why you would pay attention to her, because she's very confident, she's very beautiful, and like she is able to do this rapid fire sort of like jokey comedy, but also topical monologue, because I don't think it was scripted. It could have been, but like she wasn't reading off of a script, and she said at the beginning that she was kind of going off the cuff. And so she had that kind of like ability as a public speaker to just riff in a way that was attractive to this audience. But it was also like I couldn't help but catch these contradictions that she kept running into, which is like at the very beginning of her stand-up, she said part of her appeal is like, yeah, she's conservative, but she's not like a bigot.
Oh, well.
And then less than 10 minutes later, she called Michelle Obama Big Mike. And I didn't even like process that remark. It took me a few seconds because at first I didn't realize that she was referring to Michelle Obama. And then I realized it, and she literally said at the beginning, like, I'm not racist, I'm not transphobic. And then she makes a remark like this, and I'm like, well, that's exactly what that is like a racist transphobic remark. So it's not true, but that's the way that she's choosing to sell it and market herself.
You're right that she has a lot of charisma, that she has a lot of like that kind of acting talent. She was an actress, a child actor before she got into this. It really goes to show, I think there's this attitude nowadays in especially online media that all you need is like charisma and energy. But it's a reminder that you actually also need to have ideas, talent, something substantive to hang on to. And the reason that a lot of these people in the entertainment industry end up, because it's not just her. Ben Shapiro's a failed screenwriter.
I've written a couple comedies, kind of hour-long dramedies for, spec script.
And have they been bought?
No.
Jeremy Boring, he obviously wants to be an actor. Matt Walsh wanted to be an actor. All these guys are just failed at Hollywood. And it's because they maybe have this kind of surface level talent, but they don't have anything underneath it. And then they end up at the Daily Wire and places like that where they don't need to have anything real going on.
100%. And it's like, I think that even if you are talented, like famously, it is so hard to make a career in any kind of media, especially if you're trying to make it in Hollywood. Whereas making this type of content, what Brett Cooper does, what the Daily Wire does, it's incredibly formulaic. It's actually very easy to appeal to this audience. They just frequently repeat themselves over and over and over again. And it's like with the type of content that they make, a lot of it is really repetitive. They will make 100 videos about the same topic, and they will just slightly rehash and like change their talking points with each video. So it's not like something that requires a lot of intelligence or a lot of resources or even a lot of I think that if you are trying to make it in Hollywood, you need to be very persistent. Yeah. You have to be willing to like wait a long time and fail over and over and over again. When you're doing this type of YouTube content, it's like if you just put out this essentially slop over and over and over again, you're almost guaranteed to make it into the algorithm at some point and like get some kind of pickup.
I've long been resistant to the idea that AI is going to replace content creators, but I think that could be true. And in fact, to a large extent is true. If you look at a lot of MAGA media, it's just increasingly AI slop.
Yes.
They're the people whose careers are threatened by this.
That's a very good point. And it's like I've watched the evolution with some of these creators where they're now making the AI thumbnails. They're using the AI scripts. They're even using like the AI voiceovers because it all boils down to just like, how can you pump out, how can you churn out as much of the same thing over and over and over again?
You're in progressive journalism. You're a progressive content creator and more of a journalist than a content creator. But you understand, in this world, we all have had the same fantasy, especially if you're a woman or a minority. If I switch sides,
right,
I would make so much money. Yes. Like, why is it so easy? Why does their audience have no standards at all?
It's so much easier for them because their job is essentially to just play into the biases that their audience already has. It's so much easier to convince someone to like hate any woman than it is to convince someone that like a problematic person is still worth defending because of, you know, feminism or because of the perfect victim fallacy.
Shame on you, Blake Lively. I mean, shame on anybody who does that, because the only reason, in my opinion, that you brought that up is because you thought the feminists would just rally behind you, that we were still in 2015 and we would, you know, believe all women.
Like that work of convincing people to defend someone like Blake Lively or Amber Heard, you have to push against people's biases. You have to convince them that their preconceived opinions are wrong. But what these people are doing is they're just going for these base impulses and they're repeating what's been done successfully historically by conservative propagandists for generations. I always go back to Andrew Breitbart's Politics is Downstream of Culture, because we're really seeing that, like the conclusion of that movement, where over the past like 10 plus years, conservative media has taken on all of these causes related to diversity in Star Wars, and this Marvel superhero is a woman. And people glom onto that in a way that is so pervasive versus like actual, what we're told is like people care about bread and butter, like kitchen table issues, and that's how you reach the populace. But the opposite came to fruition, where you had people like Ben Shapiro, who this has been his mission for years and years and years, and he was able to spawn this very profitable, popular ecosystem based around conservative identity politics and appealing to like lowest common denominator thoughts and feelings.
It really is, like you said, it couldn't be a more shallow, less important issue. It's like, who cares if the Captain Marvel movie is good? Like, I don't care if the Captain Marvel movie is good.
Captain Marvel is the worst. Captain Marvel is terrible.
But if Captain Marvel fails, it'll be because of American sexism. Therefore, we need more women empowerment. Therefore, AOC. That's how this math works.
But the amount of outrage and energy that is spent on it, it really goes to show that culture matters and representation matters, and the right believes this even more than the left does.
100%. One of my frustrations with sort of looking at like the progressive media environment is that there's a lot of times an unwillingness to engage with these issues because they're seen as frivolous. Yeah. And on one hand, they kind of are compared to a lot of the other things that are happening in the world. But on the other hand, when you don't talk about this stuff, it creates this pipeline that has no opposition. Like if you Google some of these pop culture topics, or if you search them up on YouTube, the only thing you're getting is this right-wing pipeline that is very intentionally designed to like get all these unsuspecting, apolitical, or even liberal audiences, get them hooked on this content that is very like covertly conspiratorial and conservative, and then all of a sudden they're watching Candace Owens. All of a sudden, they're watching the transvestigation of the French president's wife.
One of the contradictions that our audience is fascinated with, and we spoke about in the monologue a lot, is that there's so many of these female anti-feminists in the right-wing media, and they will often go off on how women working, women having jobs, women having careers is bad or was a lie sold to you by feminists, and you're like, no, but you're doing this.
Maybe women find more fulfillment in those tasks, that they want to spend time with their children, that they would like to have a hybrid job so they can go home and take their kids to soccer or spend time with them or cook dinner for them because they love that. Maybe because we're good at that, because that's what we're actually like designed to do.
I think about this constantly because it's like you have this idea of the trad wife that is inspired by all of these women influencers, but it's all a performance. They are not actually traditional wives or traditional women. In a lot of cases, they're like stay-at-home media titans.
Yeah.
Like Candace Owens will put on the cover of her book, make him a sandwich. Meanwhile, she's fashioning herself as like the Gen Z millennial Oprah who's conservative. And she's very, very successful at doing this. And so she has a full-time media career. And she's telling her female audiences that they should not aspire to do what she does. The fantasy for these women is like, you don't have to work. Your husband should be the one who's working, and your job is to like stay at home and raise the kids. But meanwhile, Candace is like the breadwinner of her family. And so it's just like, it's mirror world. And it's so lucrative to sell this like traditional living fantasy. But even if you look at some of the trad wife influencers like Ballerina Farm, who is kind of who is associated with like the trad wife label, she herself is, first of all, married to like the heir of JetBlue. So they have more money than any of her viewers will ever see in their lives.
But she's the one bringing the income in.
She's bringing the income in. She now has all of these different businesses. She has all these merchandising lines, and the ad revenue from the viral social media content is probably one of the biggest drivers of like their financial success.
And Brett Cooper's brand, I call her MAGA Girlboss.
Mm-hmm.
But it is true that she is always doing these videos about how feminists want to dominate men and it's all a lie and feminism hasn't been valid since the 1920s.
Feminism has not been about female empowerment since women got the right to vote. Seriously.
And she has built a female audience with this. I can see why men are ready to hear women tell them that feminism is bad, but you would think that women would see this contradiction a little more clearly.
Yeah, to me, it's just like a new generation of girl boss feminism of the 2010s, which is like they're able to sell this rejection of feminism because they're like, it didn't work for you. But when you look at who was held up as like the girl boss, it was frequently women who were the heads of media companies and like fashion and beauty enterprises. And the women who sort of personified the girl boss were women like Karlie Kloss, who did like the whole like getting women into coding back in like the mid 2010s. But meanwhile, she's a supermodel.
Yeah.
And now she's married to a Kushner. And it's like the girl boss didn't really change. It's just the girl boss went from selling like pseudo-liberalism to now selling this like pseudo-conservatism.
Which at least is more capitalist.
Yeah.
She did an interesting thing. She worked for the Daily Wire for a long time, but a few months ago she quit, and it seems very much like an F you pay me moment.
Yes.
And that you can see why her male bosses probably weren't super happy with that. Mm-hmm. She was making them a lot of money, but in one sense, they are sincere in their ideology that women shouldn't be making equal pay.
Right.
So she struck out on her own, and the hypocrisy is just layered upon. I think it's actually turned into like a black hole of hypocrisy where it just doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because it's like so much of what they talk about is rooted in fantasy. They can just openly lie because that's what they were already doing anyways. And the way that I discovered Brett Cooper, which is so sad to me, is like I think I had seen her being compared to the female Ben Shapiro, which is how most people originally heard of Brett Cooper is when she started at the Daily Wire. There were all of these viral tweets that were like, they created a female Ben Shapiro in like a lab. And then I saw her again about a year after that when I was reporting on celebrity deepfakes. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at these like horrible forums where they were making these non-consensual deepfakes, sexually explicit deepfakes of women. And what I found is that conservative media titans who were women were being deepfaked just as much as like liberal women media titans. Yes. There was like a specific kind of niche where it's like they loved making deepfakes. They loved sexually humiliating these female conservative women. And that I found stuff about Brett Cooper in there, and I found stuff about all the other women who were associated with the Daily Wire. And it's like they preach anti-feminism and they join these like smear campaigns to undermine women who come forward about sexual abuse, but they themselves are not immune from this. And in fact, they're vulnerable to it in a lot of ways. And so this fantasy that they're selling women that you can beat you can succeed just by being a conservative traditional woman, it's not true. It falls apart immediately.
Now you've made me feel a little bit sorry for her.
Right.
I wish I could just like get an honest, I wish I could get any of them to be honest about what it's like to make your money by pandering to just the creepiest dudes.
100%. Yeah.
So now it's time for our mic drop question. So I do think that Brett Cooper probably did model herself off Ben Shapiro a little.
Mm-hmm.
That was a smart career move for her. And on that vibe, if there was any celebrity that you could be the mini-me for, who would it be?
This is such a good question. And I really, my mind went to Evan Rachel Wood because I'm such a huge admirer of the way that she used her platform to make a documentary and push for legislation around, abuse victims and talk about her own experiences. And I feel like a lot of women in media, unfortunately, perpetuate kind of, the sort of status quo in the same way that you have the Brett Cooper and Candace Owens wanting to remake their success. So it's I look at which celebrity women have really leaned into activism in an effective way that creates opportunities for other women and not just being your own girl boss.
I really like that. That was a very sincere answer. I think a lot of people would be like, who do I look like?
Well, I did think about that too.
But you do look similar.
Well, thank you. People have told me that I look like Alicia Silverstone, who is now an RFK supporter.
Oh no, of course she is.
But I do get that a lot too.
Now you've opened my mind. I'm like, who would I really want to be? Because I was like, I look like Molly Shannon.
Oh, true. Wait, that's so funny.
But I'd probably want to be more like a Carrie Fisher.
Yes.
Somebody who's just secretly the funniest person in the world.
Yes. Ugh.
Everyone's like, oh, she's a movie star. No, she is down stone cold hilarious.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Kat. And I would like to ask you to hype yourself. Tell the folks where to find you.
So I run the newsletter Spitfire News. It's at spitfirenews.com. And you can also find me on Blue Sky and Instagram, both at Kat Tenbarge.
Thank you again, Kat Tenbarge. She's been my guest today. Please stick around for the encore. We'll have a song recommendation for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Hey folks, usually I film Encore from my partner's record store, Latchkey, but I'm not doing that today because it is too hot to go anywhere. There is no way I could make it to any location without being a sweaty mess. One advantage, of course, of filming from home is cats. This is Joey, named after Joey Ramone, and he wants me to put him down, so say hi, Joey. Today's song recommendation is My Spine is the Bassline by a band called Shriekback. They have members of Ecstasy and Gang of Four in them. They're from the 80s. They're British, obviously. And the reason I picked this song is it wasn't on streaming for forever. And it just came back on streaming, so I was really excited about that. I first heard this song, I guess around 2008. I bought a compilation CD called Disco Not Disco 3. The whole series is great. It really is about chronicling the era of the late 70s, early 80s, where a lot of people that were punk rockers started to listen to disco. I call it the Mud Club music, after the Mud Club in New York City at the time that really featured a lot of this kind of music. Other people call it death disco, after the Public Image Limited song, or as the freaks call it, PIL. Whatever you call it, it's basically this amalgamation of rock and roll, punk rock, and funky dance beats like disco. It had a huge influence on post-punk, and I think you would consider a lot of this music to be post-punk. Eventually it morphed into bands like New Order that were just much more straightforwardly dance music. I would say the B-52s probably also had a huge influence on it as a very punky dance band. So I enjoyed the hell out of that compilation. I enjoyed the hell out of that series. I listened to it so much on CD. And so when Shriekback's song came back on streaming, I was really excited. So it's My Spine is the Baseline by Shriekback. Check it out. If you want more Standing Room Only episodes, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Standing Room Only started as a newsletter, and it's free to read. Click the link to subscribe. I love tips. These political battles are playing out in our local communities, your family, your school, your neighborhood. If you have a story, go ahead and drop me a line, leave it in comments, and don't forget to subscribe.